somebody that likes to solve puzzles.
Someone who can work within a team.
I think you have to be quite meticulous.
You have to persevere.
Intelligent enough to understand the logic of the code.
Have empathy for their users.
The first thing is patience.
Likes to solve riddles.
A good coder is someone who can think through clearly and implement their idea into code.
10 years ago, we were coding for computers, but now everything is a computer.
A lot of the redundant and rudimentary stuff we do as a developer will be taken over by these automated processes.
Things like human brain interfaces and machine learning and neural networks.
Potentially a new language that doesn't even exist yet.
I still believe we have a bright future, despite self-driving cars and artificial intelligence.
Interacting with a keyboard-less layout.
I think we're going to see a lot more voice interaction with devices.
Hopefully not computers coding themselves. This would be like, how it's called, the singularity, right?
I code because I love coding.
I code because I love, for me, it's like a brain puzzle.
Because I'm a builder, and I ran out of Lego bricks.
There's a lot of creative juices that flow when I write code.
Because I like making things, basically.
Coding is fun.
It's a fascinating, wide open field where you can do anything you absolutely want to do.
Having a problem that you turn into a solution through code is one of the most beautiful things in a job that I can imagine doing.
Good morning, Chicago, and welcome to Oracle Code. My name is Gerald Fensel, and I will be the MC for today. Now, today is a really great day, and it's a really great event because we're actually doing a developer event as Oracle. And when has that been the last time? We talk about a lot of amazing things, anything that's buzzwords, anything that's trendy technology, anything that people are actually already doing, whether that's AI, whether that's chatbots, whether that's blockchain. We talk about programming languages, databases, and so forth. You name it, everything is in there today. It's also a very special day for Java, actually. How many people in the room are Java developers? Perfect. You will love this keynote. You will see it's Java throughout, and you will love this event today. Now, before we get going, just one small thing. There is a mobile phone app that we have called Oracle Events that allows you to actually follow all the sessions throughout the day. So if you're somebody who likes to just be on your smartphone and actually see what's going on, please just go to the App Store or Play Store and download Oracle Events 18 and then search for Oracle Code Chicago, and it will give you the agenda. Also, and probably more importantly, please, if you are on Twitter, tweet about this event. We have the hashtag #OracleCode. If you see engaging speakers, if you see good presentations, and you will, please go ahead and tweet and shout out. And please also follow us on our new Twitter handle @OracleDevs, where we will share the latest and greatest throughout social media. Now, I said it's a great day for Java today. I personally used to be a Java developer before I got assimilated and worked for Oracle now. I still code some Java in my free time. I see already my colleague there is laughing. But you remember those days, like wind back 20 years ago when Java came out, right? And the people were like, oh God, yeah, Java will never be as fast as C++. This thing will never take off. And see where we're actually now. We have come a very long way throughout those years, throughout those decades, literally, and we have a very bright future ahead of us as well. Now, our first keynote speaker, Ken Cousin, will actually take us through his side of the things of the past, the present, and the future of Java, of his experience with Java. Ken also has 3 books up here that he will give away for good questions, engaging audience, and so forth. He will make sure. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Ken Cousin.
Thank you.
moment, just getting the mic fixed. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you all. Pardon me. As mentioned, my name is Ken Cousin. I will go through some of this. Basically, there's my contact information in case you want to get a hold of me at any time. There's my one-person company is Cousin IT Incorporated, or as my wife says, Cousin It. It was her idea. Yeah. What are you going to do? So a few years ago, I wrote a book called Making Java Groovy. It's a Manning book. And then back in 2016, I wrote an O'Reilly book called Gradle Recipes for Android. And my current book, the one that came out last summer, is Modern Java Recipes. That's the one where I have a couple of copies to give away for anybody who happens to want that. I've also got a bunch of videos and stuff at Safari Books Online, but let me move on. Okay, basically, I like that theme of why I code as pretty much what we're going to be talking about. So this is more or less my history with Java and related technologies. Like so many people in IT, I was actually a career changer. You know, I started off in something completely different. In fact, I was in engineering. Now, originally I thought I was going to be a professor. I was a physicist kind of thing, and I decided to go at it from two angles, from mechanical engineering and from math, and then I went to graduate school, and I was just one of those people who never really wanted to go out into the real world, seemingly, and was expecting to become a professor, but of course what happened is the whole academic market collapsed, and that's much worse now. Now, as it turns out, that was a good thing for me. I'm much happier doing what I'm doing now, rather than I would have been as a professor, but it's ironic that I've now entered a field where advanced academic degrees are actually viewed with a healthy degree of skepticism. It's like, okay, I get it, you're going to tell me what to do, but can you actually code? You know, so I don't generally talk about it that much, but it just shows that I switched over. Now, when I left school, I joined United Technologies. At the time, they were the parent company of Pratt & Whitney aircraft engines and Sikorsky helicopters and Otis elevators and Carrier air conditioners, just a whole series of things like that. And, pardon me. So when I was working there, I was working in an area called aeroacoustics of jet engines, which meant that my coding was largely Fortran, I'm afraid to say, you know. It wasn't my idea. I tried to avoid it, but all the numerical libraries were written in Fortran. I had no real choice. We worked on workstations, you know, back the Sun workstations and IBM AIX workstations, all those sorts of things. I had an office mate who used to work on the giant supercomputers, and he would run simulations of computational fluid dynamics that would take months on a supercomputer and produce gorgeous pictures which may or may not have meant anything, you know. When I look back on that, I realized that I worked on programs that had somewhere between, 50 and 75,000 lines of Fortran. And I now realize that I don't think I ever saw anything that I would currently identify as an actual test case. No darn wonder nobody ever wanted to touch the code, you know, because it's such a potential disaster there. So I decided to switch from Fortran to Java. See, Fortran 90 came out, and I thought that was cool, and all the engineers around me were like, why do you care about that? And I knew, again, I was in the wrong area. You know, I always wanted to be more in the IT area. And it's Bruce Eccles' Thinking in Java book that made that possible for me. That was quite I remember reading the first edition of that book. I think I have a link to the fourth edition, and of course, he could seriously use a fifth one at this point. But that one made the big difference for me. And then I had a friend who ran an AI group at the Research Center back then. This is roughly the mid-90s, so we're talking about 96, 97. I started off in Java at version 1.0.6, 6 or 8, something like that. Not doing anything very good at it, but that's where I started off. And he ran a group that did genetic algorithms and neural networks and things like that, and I thought that was cool. But again, I was looking for an excuse to use Java wherever I could. And one thing I did, and I think that I probably am the only person in this room who has this distinction, I actually wrote a program that put a Java Swing user interface on top of a Fortran program. Now that I said that, did anybody in here ever do that? Really? My condolences. Yeah. And we had the whole idea was they had these sensors that were monitoring elevator behavior for Otis. And we're collecting all this data in these massive data files, see, as big as 6 gigs. You know, they were huge, right? And back then, that was big. And of course, these statistical algorithms and the AI algorithms were either in Lisp, which they weren't using at the time, or Fortran. And I decided to put a Java Swing GUI on it. And I have a couple of conclusions for that. First of all, don't do that. Okay. Secondly, it turns out JNI really is a thing, or at least it was then. And then, of course, the third one is, well, it worked on my machine. You know, I was never able to deploy it anywhere else, but it did work for a little while. And it was fun, and I learned a lot. But that was the sort of thing I was battling at the time. Of course, what I finally realized when I moved over to this AI group is that 10, 12 years of coding in Fortran hadn't really taught me anything about software development. I tried to use good structure and everything, but Fortran had these things called common blocks. And I don't know if you're familiar with Fortran, but common blocks is basically global data. In other words, it was exactly the wrong thing to do. And of course, anything could change anything, and it was just a disaster. So anyway, I decided it was time to go back to school at that point, and I wound up getting a master's in computer science at night. And also, I wound up getting that Sun Certified Java Developer thing. Now that, back when getting certifications was a thing too, you know, when that was a big deal. That again, I owe a debt of gratitude to Kathy Sierra and probably Bert Bates as well, not for the not for the Head First Java book, this is before all that, but for the fact they created Java Ranch, and that was a great place to study for certification. Some of you may remember that if you were back in the field at that time. Eventually, I got the Sun Certified Web Component Developer and the Business Component Developer. The Head First EJB book was the first time I understood EJBs at all, so that was very, very helpful. And unlike being in academia or in a research area, suddenly I had options. You know, suddenly I could actually move around. See, this was roughly 2000, and the bubble had burst, but we didn't know it yet, okay? So I had options, and I decided what I really wanted to do was teach software development training classes, because this way I could always learn the newest things, you know, learn what was going on, and then tell everybody about it. And that's what I liked the most. I've never been as interested in being the person who comes up with an API. I'm much more interested in learning about an API and then helping other people use it. That's much more fun for me. So that's what I got to do. So when I wound up back in 2000 becoming a trainer, I guess you'd say, back then you'd teach an intro Java class a month and they would fill every month. I mean, it was a big deal for a while there. And a lot of C++ people, a lot of VB people. I remember VB6, I think it was a mess. And I wrote a little applet, like we all did back then, to start playing with some of this Java stuff. Now, that's so many hard drive crashes ago, I don't have the code for that anymore. But what I was able to do was to resurrect that as an actual Swing user interface. I actually have it here, I think. So if I run this, I'll give you an idea what it looks like. You like my little Nyan progress bar, by the way? At any rate, so what would happen, now again, this was an applet in class, but I'm writing it as a desktop app now, is that it would take a bunch of terms that would come up during class and just shuffle them and grab the first 9 and build a bingo board. And as you heard them during class, you would click on them and it would just change color and disable the button. And if you got 3 in a row, I actually went to the trouble to find the old Windows 3.1 ta-da sound to put in there. And of course, the best part is you would win fabulous prizes. At the time, the fabulous prizes I used were Wild Cherry Lifesavers, as I recall. So this actually, now that I wasted so much time last week, I actually built this again in Java and Swing, and this is in a GitHub repository that I have. So if you want it now, I even have a menu now that lets me reset it and restart, so, you know, there we go. And I can mute it too, by the way, so that's good. But that was the sort of thing I was doing, finding an excuse to use the Java coding to help other people learn this stuff. Because the real battle in an intro Java class is learning the OO part, especially the terms. Because it's, you know, whenever there's a choice between a 2-syllable word and a 10-syllable word, they always went with a 10-syllable word. We can't say wrap, we have to say encapsulate, right? We can't say make, we have to say instantiate, or even create's not enough. And the worst part is you start talking like that, you know? So at any rate, that was a mechanism to help people learn that stuff. So there's a picture of that, for example. So it used a Swing UI, and as I say, it's in my GitHub repo. I used the Collections API. This was pretty new back then, 1.2 and everything. And of course, I had the resources in a WAV file. And basically, I could give people, now, of course, I generate a jar file with a main method in it so that you could just double-click on the jar file and start it up. But back then, of course, it was an applet, so I would run a version of Tomcat during class, and people could access the URL and just refresh their page each time, play with it that way. Now, another one that was a lot more ambitious, yeah, the fabulous prizes, of course. I wrote this thing I called it Jepper GUI, desperately trying to avoid is that trademark or copyright infringement? I'm not sure which one, but I was trying to avoid both, I suppose. And this was basically a game where I would put a game board in the front of the room, and then each person in the room would get a little buzzer on their machine. Again, it was a jar file. They could just double click on it. It would start off a buzzer. And this used RMI. So remember when that was a thing too? So that when you joined the game, you could access the game board, and all the scores were kept by teams. And at the time, I made the database everything was on Windows at the time. So I was using the dreaded sun.jdbc.odbc.jdbc.odbc bridge driver. Remember that monster? So yeah, slow, but who cared? I didn't need an actual database driver. I just needed to set it up as an ODBC data source on the instructor machine, and everything worked fine. Well, again, so many hard drive crashes ago, but I actually found the code for this one as a jar file, and then I had to go through the battle of downloading it because Gmail didn't want me to download a zip/jar, but eventually I got it, and I can't really show you that code because I'm embarrassed at this point. I mean, if you look at code you wrote 15 years ago and you're not embarrassed, I guess you haven't learned anything, I suppose, but, But to give you an idea how this worked, so let me go to this one here. So I ran it with an Ant build, and if I start up Ant, now I did switch the driver, so I'm using this uAccess driver that is still accessing the same database that I made at the time. So I can get the categories, and it'll give me some categories to grab, and when I select it, I can create the game board, and this is what the game board looked like, and there's all the different buttons, and of course I was using inheritance for the buttons. It's a question button that extends a J button, etc. But even better, if I go to here, then I can run, let's magnify that a bunch, I could say java-jar, and then I think it's in the dist folder, and this would be a client. So the client would get a player and a team name, so let's put in a guru from Oracle, of course. And of course the server is on localhost, so there's my first button, and no reason I can't run another one. So if I go down to downloads again, let's run it again, -jar, dist, jep, there we go. And let's put this as a noob, and I'll put that, I guess, at Google, right? That makes sense. Yeah. So here would be the buzzers on the machines around the room, and then I could switch over to the game board. In fact, why don't I move that over to where the buzzers are, just so you could see the whole thing like that. And you see how the scores were kept by team. So the team would come up here, and whenever I'd open up a question, then somebody could buzz in, and there was a sound and everything, and I'd say whether it was right or wrong. You see the scores could go up or down. And I'm really shocked to tell you that this still works, I really can't believe it. Again, I have to clean up a lot of the code, but man, I'm thinking I might even use this again sometime. Of course, the best part is, let's see, where's my IDE here? The daily double is at 1.4 here, so that would be 0, 1, 2, 3. I think it's here. Nope, the other one. Let's give them a score too. 0, 1, 2. There it is. There's the daily double. So then we click on it, and then of course you'd wager up to whatever your score was, and then actually had the WAV file in there and everything. So hopefully that was right. So at any rate, play that game, and that was a lot of fun. And eventually that'll be in my GitHub repo as well if you're interested. But again, it's all working with an Ant build at the moment, so it could run RMIC and everything. I'm just shocked that it's still working after all these years. The most fun I had with that, by the way, or maybe not the most fun, but the weirdest situation I had with that is, of course, I would make a separate table for each course I was teaching, and this was the Java table, and I'd make different tables for different courses. But one time we were having an open house at a training company, and there were a lot of salesmen coming through. So I made a board just for the salespeople or whatever. And I learned something interesting about salespeople. The salespeople didn't care at all about getting the questions right. They just wanted to be first. So as soon as I'd bring up a question, you'd hear bang, 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 as everybody's banging on the button to try to get a hold of it. And you'd have scores of -500, -1,000, -1,200, and they didn't care at all. They just wanted to be in there first of all. So go figure. But it was a lot of fun, and again, it was an excuse to write something Java related on all of that. So let me go back here. Now, of course, in 2005, you'll probably remember when the good old Ruby on Rails meteor hit the Java world, shaking everything up so dramatically. And at the time, I figured, fine, I'll go learn some of that as well. And unfortunately, I wasn't really able to learn Ruby very well at that time. Now, I probably could look at it now and get it much better. But at the time, it was much harder. So a year later, I was attending a Spring user group meeting, and they had a presentation by Jason Rudolph, who was talking about Grails. And Grails involves Spring and Hibernate, both of which I was reasonably familiar with. And of course, the ideas from Ruby on Rails. So I jumped into that. Of course, jumping into that meant I had to jump into Groovy. And to me, it was like, it wasn't really leaving Java, because Groovy is about as close a language as you can get to Java. And in fact, Groovy's never designed to replace Java. It's designed to supplement it. Every Groovy system I've ever worked with eventually has Java in it as well. So I could leverage all my Java knowledge and add a lot of Groovy stuff. So rather than look at any of the Grails apps or anything like that, I do want to mention something Groovy related. I wrote an app called Groovy Baseball. And what this one did is it consumed a RESTful web service, that one being provided by Google in the form of their geocoder. You send them an address, and you download either XML or JSON, and you could parse it and get latitude and longitude data out of it. And then I took the data for the stadium locations and saved them into an H2 database so that I could distribute this to people, and parse all the data to get the scores of the games out of it. And I used Gradle for the build tool with a Gradle plugin to allow me to deploy it. So as an example of this, this is, let's see, here. You know, I've got all the team names and everything, and I'm able to grab the stadiums out of there and create, all of this is going to wind up matching patterns and doing the JSON slurper to pull the data down and all of that. But the neat part is that I can actually run this by saying, I could say Gradle W, and then I can't remember whether it's app run or run app. I think it's app run. From the Gradle plugin, what this will do is it'll deploy it on Jetty, interestingly enough. Now this plugin allows you to deploy on Jetty or Tomcat or a cluster of all the above. And now it's listening on port 8080 under Groovy Baseball. So if I can go here. So if I open this up and paste that in, this is what it does. It brings up a Google map, and it's downloading the scores for a given game, and it starts with yesterday. And you can see these were all pulled out of the Major League Baseball data that's available online. So again, this actually is in a GitHub repository. This is for my Making Java Groovy book. So all the code is there in case you want that. I've been updating that and pushing changes to that as well. And it was a nice illustration of the sorts of things you could do with Groovy and therefore underlying with Java as well. So that was a lot of fun. Okay, now this one, the Vampire Movies one, what was happening is I was writing this Making Java Groovy book, and I wandered into my local Barnes & Noble. Remember when that was a thing? You know? And I noticed that there was only one shelf at the time that was labeled computer, and there were 3 or 4 labeled teen paranormal romance. So I thought the only thing I can do now is I'm going to need to, clearly what my book needed was some groovy vampires, So I had to add that. Now, what I wound up doing is I consumed data from the Rotten Tomatoes API. It turns out that had a RESTful web service as well. And because that was all JSON data, I would store it in a Mongo database. So it gave me a chance to play with NoSQL as well. And then I could actually take the data and serve it up myself using either Ratpack or Grails. I don't know if you're familiar with Ratpack at all. It's a microservice framework in the Groovy world that's based on the ideas from, of course, Sinatra from the Ruby world. I mean, just the fact it's called Ratpack I thought was sufficiently amusing. I had to try it out, you know. And of course, Grails does it as well. Now that one, unfortunately, I can't demonstrate. I was playing with it, and it turned out that Rotten Tomatoes has been acquired by Fandango, I think. And they have their own API, and they now say right on the site they no longer permit unrestricted access to their data. You actually have to fill out a form proposing what you're going to do, and I figured, no, that's way too silly, you know. So I haven't done that, but I still have the code and everything, interestingly enough. Now, of course, I took my book and I got my local Barnes & Noble to actually get a couple of copies, and I put it was in the IT section, and after a while I figured, well, you know, it's got vampires in it, so I took a copy of it and I moved it over to the teen paranormal romance section, but unfortunately it just sat there for a while, and then one day I came in and it was actually gone, and I thought, oh boy, somebody actually bought it. I couldn't believe it, so I went to the info desk and no, they just moved it. So apparently the overlap between, say, you know, 14-year-old vampire, you know, fan fiction fans and Java Groovy developers is not as big as I was hoping. So much for that. Okay, now later, I was on the No Fluff Just Stuff tour. I'm still on that now, and we needed somebody to do some Android presentations. And of course, Android's Java, right? Except that depends on which lawyers you talk to, I suppose. And I'm not going to get in the middle of that one. But it was certainly easy enough for me to learn because it was Java-based, you know, the whole idea. So I'll stick with Java-based and hope that doesn't ruffle any feathers the wrong way, but feel free to let me know. And in order to play with that, I decided I was going to go grab yet another RESTful web service. And for that, I went to icndb.com, which is the Internet Chuck Norris database. Like, it's one of those, serves up Chuck Norris jokes. And you have to be careful with that because, unfortunately, not all those jokes are really suitable for public consumption. You know, so I have to be dicey about it. But if you restrict them to just the nerdy jokes, then you get the good ones. Like, I think my favorite was Chuck Norris can make a method abstract and final. Like, there's a pretty good skill. So at any rate, I have that over here. No, the other one. So this one, as you can see, I put Brian Getz in there for the actual name. And I have it in Java here. Let's actually go to the Java version. And the Java version is using, well, Java basically, retrofit and an async task. And I'm also using retrofit either synchronously or asynchronously. If you ever do look for a library to do RESTful web services, retrofit is an excellent one, by the way. It's from Jake Wharton at Square. Well, it used to be at Square, now at Google, okay? And I use a lot of that, and I can go in and I can change the, actually, let me run this one, because I think I'm looking at the other one. So if I execute this one, of course, it's taking a while, isn't it? There we go. Now, okay, this has a tiny bit of a story as well. I made this whole app, and I used it as a teaching app, again, to present how to write an app that did RESTful web services and saved data and did networking and asynchronous tasks and all of that. And then I put it in the Google Play Store, because why not, you know? And a little while later, I got an email from Patent Boggs LLP, the attorneys for Mr. Carlos Ray, quote, Chuck Norris. Did you know Chuck Norris's first actual name is Carlos Ray Norris? I had no idea. Anyway, it was claiming I was infringing on his intellectual property, and I'm like, I don't get it. I'm consuming data from a public website. I'm giving this away. What's the problem? So I ignored it. And a week later, Google suspended my app, right? Now, normally, I'm way too much of a coward to do anything about that. But this time, I got annoyed. So I rewrote it as the Internet Carlos Ray database. And if you actually went to Google Play, so if I go to play.google.com and I look at I got to go to the apps section. So here's the apps section. and I search on ICNDB, I think that'll do it. Then here it is. See I even put the lawyer's name right on the icon there, you know. Why not, right? What are they going to do? Make me take it down again, you know? And you put your pictures up there. When Carlos Ray throws exceptions, it's across the room, or, you know, when Carlos Ray writes code with bugs, the bugs fix themselves. Of course, and by the way, I gave it a 5-star rating, you know. I mean, why not, you know? And I have a few others, and see, it's got, you know, best Carlos Ray app ever. That's phenomenal. I love that, you know. I've tried them all, and this is the best one, you know. So again, I gave it out. Then I did the one thing you can't do, by the way, which is I lost the key, you know, because you have to sign it with a private or with your public key. You have to put a digital signature on the APK. And it's not for encryption purposes, it's for non-repudiation. So if it goes wrong, they know who to blame, you know? And I lost my repo or whatever, not the repo, I'm trying to think the certificate. And therefore I can't update it anymore. But of course I have much more update versions. This one uses retrofit. This is using Hans Doctor, who's the head of the Gradle project, you know, and I can use synchronously and asynchronously. I've got Tim O'Reilly in there. So I have a whole series of them. Now, so that code is all available if you're interested in my GitHub repository as well as ICNDB_AS for Android Studio. And of course, recently I've had to get into Kotlin a little bit. Here's the shocking part. This is pretty much the entire app in Kotlin. I do have this file which contains the classes that map to the JSON structure coming back. See, I like this JSON example because it's small and it's funny, you know, hopefully, but it's sufficiently small that I could just write a couple of classes and get back. See, there's my type is okay, and my wrapper has an ID and a joke and a list of categories. And then inside here, it turns out in Kotlin, you can extend app compat activity. There's the base URL that I'm going to access, and I can actually use Google's JSON, and they even have do async and then UI thread to get off of the UI thread to do the networking and then back on the UI thread in order to execute it. And this is the one where, of course, I decided to use Brian Getz as the person we want to deal with. So clicking there, never has to build his program to machine code. Machines have learned to interpret Brian Getz code. That's not bad. Let's see. That's dated. See if we can do better. We can do better than that. Okay, that's not bad. I mean, it depends, you know, and you can play with that as well. So I spent some time playing with Android, and now I'm using that as a way to get into Kotlin somewhat, mostly because I do Android, and also I do Gradle, and Gradle's adding a Kotlin DSL as well, so I need to learn some of that. So at any rate, back to where we were. So there's your pictures. These are some pretty good ones. Can spawn threads that complete before they're started. That's a good one. Or can't test for equality because he has no equal. I like that, yeah. All right, so at the time, then I wound up writing this Gradle Recipes for Android book. So it talks about Gradle as part of the build tool, lots of tips and tricks. And then just to kill all the sales entirely, if you were to go to Gradle.org in the books section, you can download this book for free. They will ask you for an email address, and they want to find out if they can market to you for Gradle Enterprise. But if you're willing to give them an email address, they'll send you a link, and you can have that book for free now. So there you go. Okay, now then, of course, Java 8 finally came out. And we'd been waiting for years for that, speaking of Brian Getz, of course, who was instrumental in all of the functional changes in Java 8, or SE8, I suppose. I finished the Gradle Recipes for Android book, and then I had this foolish notion that, hey, I just wrote a recipes book for O'Reilly. How hard could it be to write another recipes book for O'Reilly? Not realizing that this one was going to be, you know, twice the size and much more complicated and everything. But this gave me a chance to play with the streams and lambdas and method references and all these different things as well, which need no introduction for you. I mean, for this audience, I'm sure you're quite familiar with all of that. Of course, Java 9 has been out, so I have a chapter on Java 9 that does minimal, not a whole lot of stuff, but talks about private methods and interfaces and additions to various classes and a little bit about JPMS as well. So some of that stuff is in there. I thought I'd show you one unusual example. This is, they say you can tell a developer by whispering in their ear the word time zones and watching a shudder go down their spine, okay? And this is the picture of time zones in Antarctica, okay? So there's a scary picture. Now, in fact, the funny part doesn't even jump out at you until somebody points it out. Here's the funny part. You see the South Pole here? The South Pole is part of what they call the Ross Dependency, and that means it follows the time zone rules, it turns out, of New Zealand. And what this means is that the South Pole, 6 months of darkness followed by 6 months of daylight, is actually on daylight savings time, believe it or not. Well, now, of course, now that the java.time package has been added to Java, I can actually check that sort of thing. So I can go over to IntelliJ, let's see, this is here, and this is my, this one. This is my Antarctica time zones app, which gets all the available zone IDs, turns them into a stream, filters them by Antarctica, maps them to zone IDs directly, and then creates a zone date time using now.atZone. Now is just local datetime.now. And I sort them by their offset from UTC in terms of seconds. And when I execute this, you can see the time zones in Antarctica here listed one by one. This troll's got to be a joke. I don't know what that, I mean, I'm taking that literally. And I have another version of this app in the book, I'm not showing it right now, that actually checks daylight savings time. And yes, indeed, the South Pole currently is on daylight savings time, believe it or not. I have one other somewhat amusing app from that same idea. If you are, I'm sure we have some people from India or people who have had conference calls with people from India or been there. If you know anything about India, you know that the India Standard Time, which of course there's no such thing, right? It's all UTC offsets and region IDs. At any rate, Indian Standard Time is UTC plus 530. See, they're half an hour offset from GMT, interestingly enough. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And then somebody said to me, did you know that there are time zones in the world that are 45 minutes offset from UTC? And I'm like, you're pulling my leg. So now, in fact, this is based on an example in the Java tutorial, but the one in the Java tutorial doesn't use streams. So, of course, I had to clean that up. So this one gets a zone date time and then maps them to zone IDs, and I filter them by ones with an offset that is not an integral multiple of 3600 for the seconds, okay? So again, sort them, and now I'll print out the offset and the zone ID and the localized date time. And of course, my favorite method here is the with zone same instant. So you can find out what time it is there. And when I run this, then you'll see, for example, that there's a bunch of half-hour offsets, even in Canada, Newfoundland apparently, St. John's is half an hour offset. There you go, there's Kathmandu, and with both with and without the H. Turns out all of Nepal is UTC plus 545. Go figure. This one I gotta ask one of my Australian friends. UCLA, I had to look it up in Wikipedia. It's an old railway station, population 600. Okay. Go figure, 845, and then the Chatham Islands off of New Zealand as well. So again, just trying to keep things a little bit entertaining, and there are examples in the book as well. So, okay. Now, I have to, of course, talk to you about cat pictures, right? I mean, that's the reason we have the internet at all. And what I wound up doing is, again, I'm using Java now, but I'm still using Groovy to an extent and Kotlin to an extent as well. So what I did is I went to Flickr, and Flickr has what they would call a RESTful web service, but that real REST advocates would be appalled by, you know, because it actually has method names in it and all of that. By the way, you know what those REST advocates call themselves? Do you know that? Yeah, they call themselves Restafarians. Do you believe that? Yeah, I didn't come up with that one, you know. Oh, speaking of jokes I didn't come up with, a million monkeys at a million typewriters will eventually type a Java program, and the rest will be Perl programs. Feel free to reuse that, yeah. Oh, and I suppose if we have time, at the very end, I can give you the worst SQL joke ever told. So, but there's no going back after that, so I have to do that at the very end. But I do have a good NoSQL variation. So, at any rate, I decided to consume this Flickr API with a GET request and parse it and use Groovy to do this. And what I want to show you is I actually have this app called Parallel Kitties so that I can actually use Java 8 streams in parallel to download all the pictures ostensibly at the same time. So if I go to that, actually that's the same one here. So this is Groovy code. I've got my Flickr key, and that meant I had to go and get a key at Yahoo, and boy, that's painful. So it's in the repo. Try not to do any serious damage, whatever. And I search on kitties, and here's the API. I'm going to do a Flickr photos search. I want JSON data back and photos. I only want 6 per page. And this is going to take those parameters and build a query string out of it, and I'll print out the URL. And then Groovy will let me convert that to a URL, and the string representing a URL into an instance of java.net.url, and then download the data at that location. So I'll get back the JSON data. I write it to a file, pretty printing it, and then I parse it and grab the photo elements inside there. There's a root element, and it has photos. And then inside the photos block, there are photo elements. And now here's where I'm going to use my Java 8 parallel streams. So I take my photos as a collection, and I use my map method, and I could print out the thread to see which thread each one is using. But right now I'm not printing that at the moment. This is the URL Flickr uses for the actual image. So I pull data off of the JSON structure and plug it into this URL, and that'll give me the image, and I go turn into a URL and get the bytes. So this will all, in principle, happen in parallel, collect them into a list of images. And then this is a swing builder using on the events dispatch thread where I make a JFrame and I put each image in an image icon. You see how Groovy likes to mix Java and Groovy pretty much line by line. Pretty much the same. Now I'm going to run this, but I have to warn you, I don't know what I'm going to get. Okay. Once I got tractors, and I'm like, tractor? Oh, caterpillar. I get it. Once I got dogs, I got monkeys. I have no idea if it's just going to be the latest 6 images that are tagged with the word kitties, which I figured is as good as I can get. If it's totally inappropriate, I'll just close it. Okay. So you're warned. Let's see what happens here. So if I run this guy. You'll see that there's the JSON data coming out, and then it's downloading the images. Looks like I got cats. How about that? And I even put in the mouse over, I think, or did the mouse over not working? Well, at any rate, I'm declaring victory. That's a win, right? The fact that they actually look like cats is a pretty good one. So there's your concurrent, or I suppose parallel kitties. You design for concurrency, you implement in parallel. Right, and this one's trying to execute it in parallel. Again, if I uncommented this line, I could see the individual threads running out of all of that. So, now, of course, I mentioned the past, and this is getting pretty much up to the present. The present, of course, is that Java 10 comes out today. Yay, so that'll be good, right? Yeah, feel free, go applaud that. Except that's you shouldn't be applauding me for that, right? That'll be a lot of other people. But there'll be talks all day long on that. Of course, we have our outline or our agenda of what's going on today, and there'll be lots of opportunities to learn these things. And I guess one of the messages that I feel like is that Java has basically been the background music to my career change. To the second half of my career, I was a very unhappy person in engineering, working on things I didn't enjoy in a company I didn't like. And as the first time I saw Java, I'm like, hey, I like that. Remember when it was small? That was fun. I was like, wow, this is really good. I like this. And over the years, I've just found plenty of things in the Java ecosystem that I've always enjoyed doing. And when Java kind of stagnated for a while with Sun, then I was able to move to the Groovy ecosystem and see a lot of innovation over there and find out about all the functional ideas, etc. And then when Java came out with SE8 from Oracle, then now I'm able to move back into that area also. And I'm really looking forward to whatever happens in the future as well. So enjoy the rich ecosystem around Java. I mean, there's plenty of stuff there. There's always something that looks appealing to me, at any rate. I really like it. Of course, based on the fact that I negotiated a royalty on the book that I just told you how to download for free, you don't want me negotiating your next contract, just letting you know on that particular one. So what I will say is I do have these books to give out. I don't have a good way to do it. So I do want to say one thing, though. We're having the Women in Technology Luncheon, right? So why not, any woman who's planning to go to that or whatever, here, give this to one of them. Yeah, okay, right up front, that's perfect. I mean, if I can help support women in computer science, I mean, that's a good thing. And then the rest can go to anybody. So here, you're going to pick somebody. Oh, how do I pick? So, okay, there's one back behind there, and then somebody further in the back. Sure, back in one of the last 2 or 3 rows on the left there.
There? Okay.
Yeah. And if you didn't get one, talk to me. I've got some ebooks too. I can work something out. But that's basically what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to give you a little bit of my history in the Java world and how Java has really enabled my career, basically. I'm now this Java champion and this Oracle dev champion. It's funny how all that has evolved. And, I guess I should show you, in case you are interested, other way, no. Here's the GitHub repository I was mentioning. So the GitHub repository is, God, I gotta get rid of that picture, but at any rate, is on my last name, okay, Kouscen, and I have several of them. The Making Java Groovy one, I've got the ICNDB one in there, the Bingo app is there, and the Java 8 and Java 9 recipes is also in there. That's from the actual book itself. This is a reactive spring, because you got to follow the buzzwords, right? So I saw that they had the buzzwords up there for blockchain and all the others, but I'm looking at reactive as well with Spring 5 and a handful of others. So you're welcome to take anything you find there, and good luck with it. So I'm going to basically leave it at that point and say thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy your day today.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, the sequel joke. You better turn it back up.
We need the sequel joke.
You're going to regret that. I'm telling you. This is a bad move. Okay, worst sequel joke ever told. You ready? SQL query walks into a bar, selects 2 tables, says, mind if I join you? That's really awful, isn't it? Here's no, wait a minute. I got a better one. The NoSQL variation, DBA walks into a NoSQL bar, can't find a table, so he leaves. See, that's okay. All right, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Ken. I really enjoyed that. Could we switch the slides over, please? Thank you. Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Certainly love the joke there. And I don't see anything wrong with running COBOL with Java, or perhaps. Great. This was a great personal story. I enjoyed it very much about the history of Java for an individual. Thank you very much, Ken. Now we're actually heading towards the future. Our next keynote speaker, George Saps, will tell us about where Java is going. He's the vice president of our Java platform group, so you can ask him all sorts of questions, Javas, all day long. I also have to warn you, we had a slight debate whether or not to put this picture up there, because the gentleman who will come up on the stage in a minute does not really look much of the picture, at least I think. Anyway, without further ado, please welcome George Saps.
Thanks, Gerald. I like to tell people this is my evil doppelganger look. No, seriously, it's sort of like Ken was talking about earlier. That's kind of how I looked, when I started this job, and it's really, don't start a job like this. You'll grow a beard and it'll turn gray, and it's really, really difficult. This next slide is. It's switched over the wrong way. Here we go. Is always fun, so please memorize this. There'll be a quiz. I'd like to start, first of all, just to reflect a little bit on the things that Ken was talking about here, because for us, Ken he really kind of typifies the experience we like to see that people have with Java, right? For him, Java is not just a tool that he uses. It's something that he clearly loves. It's something that has helped to shape his career and the direction of it. And basically, to summarize what he said at the end, it turned him from a really miserable person in a bad situation to a guy who just loves his life. And it really shows, and I'm not saying that's gonna happen for everyone who programs in Java, but it could. So, if you don't, you might wanna try. Seriously though, the 4 things that you see on this slide are some of the things that we think about when we think about the Java community, right? And all of the resources available. One thing that's important to us is communication around Java. And this is kind of one example that Oracle funds, the Java magazine, which if you haven't checked it out, please do. It's just a tremendous, tremendous resource. It's beautiful and it has great articles. And I didn't write any of them, so I can actually say that. Or I haven't yet anyway. I've submitted, but they'll never take mine. So in any event, there are a lot of other publications that are great. There are wonderful resources in the user groups. And in fact, later today, there will be a Chicago Java user group meeting. I think it's 6 o'clock. We have some more information, and I and some other folks from my team will be there to answer your questions. So please join us for that. Collaboration, well, Ken mentioned that he's a Java champion. For anyone who's not aware of this program, this is actually a program which recognizes people who have been instrumental in making Java successful and continue to do so. And typically this is people who have done that not just as a part of their career, but or their sort of daily work, but people who have gone above and beyond. And this is a program that Oracle takes part in and helps to fund, but it really is run by the Java champions themselves. So the people who are in that are chosen by Java champions. If you go and look and see who some of the people are there, I think you'll recognize some of the best speakers in the industry, some of the best minds in the industry, and we really appreciate everything they do. Final C here is contribution, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about OpenJDK, because this is where the construction of Java really goes on today. And I think that this is actually, at the moment, kind of an underutilized resource in terms of figuring out the direction that Java is taking, the design decisions that are made. You can see in OpenJDK the current state of development and the discussions around new features. It can help you understand why certain decisions are made and really get some insight. You can even do things like look at individual code contributions, patches and fixes as they go in, and even the code reviews. So it's a great place if you want to learn about Java and you want to learn about its direction to go and sign up for the mailing lists and kind of understand where things are headed. Okay, so this is sort of the Harper's Index of numbers around Java. I won't go into great detail here. Let's just suffice it to say that in the last just over 2 decades, Java has gone from something that was kind of new and exciting, and as Ken said, small, to something that is big in every respect. Sorry, that was not a very good joke. In fact, Java is tremendously popular. It is a great choice if you want to learn a technology and know that there's going to be a lot of demand for your expertise. It's just a terrific place to go. And I think this is something that we've always viewed as an important facet of Java. We try to make Java something where the programs that you write will continue to work, and the techniques that you learn will continue to be relevant, even if new ones come along. And in many ways, what we try to do is do a lot of the heavy lifting so that when the computing environment around you changes, you're somewhat insulated from that. And so this is, I'll give you just an example of this. We saw an application that Ken wrote. Now he said, well, I took this code and it still ran. And I think what you failed to mention was the version of Java that you were running was a current one, right? It was probably Java 8. And when you originally wrote it, it was probably 1.2. It had swings, so it had to be 1.2 at least, right? So that's, that seems really simple and obvious. But the more experience you have in our industry, the more you realize that that's actually kind of an anomaly. It's something kind of special when something that he wrote 20 years ago, he can just take and run, and it still works. Another example, as we move forward, there are lots of things around you that are changing. The hardware is changing. The operating systems are changing. And in fact, even the programming language and APIs are changing. But what we've tried to do is make it so that your Java program actually will still work and be able to take advantage of all of those things that are changing around you. So this is sort of something that you may not reflect on too much, but if you think about it, as hardware is improving, software doesn't necessarily automatically get all of that improvement. Somebody is doing the hard work of actually making it so that your Java program, converted into bytecodes and then into native code, is actually writing to use the optimizations in the underlying hardware. And there's a lot of heavy lifting that goes on there. A lot of it comes from my team, but frankly, with OpenJDK, a lot of it comes from the industry as a whole. And so what I mean by this is, if you go to OpenJDK, you will see people from Oracle taking part. You'll also see people from places like Red Hat and Microsoft taking part. You'll also see hardware manufacturers like Intel and ARM taking part. And so that's pretty neat and pretty unique, and it really can only happen because of the open ecosystem around the development of Java. Okay, so I mentioned this before. Java development is done in the open, and increasingly so, and I'll mention something on that in a moment. It's evolving, and as Ken said, there was a little period there where not so much was happening. There actually was a lot happening then. There were just not new major versions of Java. The VM was continuing to evolve. The implementation of Java was evolving, but essentially the language and the APIs were not going through a lot of change. What we have seen and what we're seeing increasingly going forward is more change, more rapid change, and hopefully more rapid change that improves your life, doesn't make it harder. And so, what I'm pleased to say is we have a lot of tools in the Java ecosystem to make sure that as we're moving into the more rapid change with 6-month releases, that is something that happens in a way that works smoothly. I'll give you an example of this. Has anyone heard of the TCK? Do you know what that is? Okay. So only one person, and he works for me, so that doesn't count. So the TCK, or sometimes it's also called the JCK, is a compatibility test kit for Java. It is something that we've built up over the last 20 years. It has literally hundreds of thousands of tests that test compatibility of the Java implementation to make sure that it is consistent across different operating systems and platforms and windowing systems, and also across versions of Java. So this is something, and this sounds really simple and obvious, right? Of course, there's a test suite. But keep in mind, this is a test suite testing and implementation against the specification of Java. Now, how many of you, on a daily basis, read the Java specification? Oh, not a lot of people. Well, I'm not surprised by that. I will say, a colleague of mine here on the front row who is heartbroken to hear this, because he spends a good deal of his time making sure that the Java specification is up to date, that it is complete, that it is good and consistent and coherent. And in fact, I'm going to bring him up to say a few words in a moment here, so he can bemoan the fact that you don't all read the specification every single day. Having said that, you shouldn't have to, right? Nobody should have to. But it is there, and it is fairly unique, I think you'll find, for programming languages that Java has this. And it is something that means that we have a great resource to be able to tell, as we're making changes, whether those changes are going to break you or not, and try to make sure that we're not breaking things. So essentially our goal is, as we're moving forward more quickly, to make sure that we're doing so methodically and carefully, and in a way that's making improvements. I'm going to also mention scalability, because I think that this is something that we've sort of noticed over the past probably 3 or 4 years. we see the other programming languages that are out there and that have gained some traction. Ken mentioned Ruby. There are certainly others that more recently have been getting a lot of enthusiasm and noise. And this we actually think is great. We have a lot of those are actually built on the JVM. Some of them are not. But I will say that there's a tremendous community around programming language development. Most of those folks all kind of know each other. Many of them are actually on speaking terms, which is great. In fact, more than that, we actually have a small conference which we've hosted for almost a decade now, where people who are working on programming languages get together and talk about their experiences. Because this is something where we think that most designers of programming languages have more to learn from each other, from talking and sharing, and kind of understanding, well, what did you guys try over here? How did that work? Has it gone well? Has it not gone well? What new possibilities did it bring about? What kinds of challenges were inherent? And so that's kind of cool. One of the things we've seen with all of these languages that have come around is that many of them they come about, there's a lot of enthusiasm and kind of growing community around them. And then over time, people kind of figure out the things that they're good for and maybe the things they're not quite as good for. One of the things that we've seen as kind of an ongoing trend is a lot of people trying these out as a way of getting more rapid development, right? This is something that really supports me. I don't have to write as much code. It does a lot of things for me. But then often, that is great when you're getting started and you just want to get something up and running, because nobody's going to keep funding you if they can't see that you built anything. On the other hand, the next step is going from that to hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of users. And when you need to get to that level of scalability, many of these tools that are newer have not quite gotten to the point of maturity yet where they can handle that. And so a lot of people have been turning to Java. So we found there's sort of a complete group of people who maybe weren't introduced to Java. Maybe they thought it didn't seem that appealing. It was like, oh man, my mom wrote in that language. I don't want to write in that language. But now they found that when they really need something that's going to support them for the next stage of their growth, they turn to Java as that thing. Our goal now is actually to get back to the point where people never need to make that first step of choosing wrong, and they can just choose Java from the beginning. So that's part of what the 6-month releases are about, is making it so that some of the small improvements that we do, you don't have to wait for 2 or 3 years for them to become available to you in a GA version. Instead, you can get them right off the bat. Okay. This is also something we're seeing as people move to the cloud. Very interestingly, there are a bunch of clouds out there that are provided by vendors other than us. I know that comes as a surprise, but in fact there are. And in fact, what we tend to see is a lot of noise from many of those vendors about Java. And part of the reason is, what they tend to find is that a lot of the workloads that people run in the cloud are actually Java workloads. Okay, so on the platform side, what are some of the things we're investing in? Well, I want to say first and foremost that security is always our #1 priority. So we will always, if we have a choice between working on making something more secure or adding a new API, we always will work on security first. And I think we're going to see that becomes even more important in the cloud. I think there's stuff in the news about this even today. And the fact that there's a debate about whether that's a security breach or not is an interesting one. But I do think it's kind of undeniable that security is one of the most important topics in our industry. Working on developer productivity and compatibility, right? So compatibility I just mentioned. Also trying to find the places where Java rightfully was given kind of a reputation as boilerplate heavy, or being very verbose and not in a good way. We've been working on ways to slim that down and make the compiler and the runtime smarter so that you don't have to write as much. Increasing density. Now this also is a very, very important topic as you're going to the cloud. Basically, the more you can get running on less computing resources, the less you're going to have to pay for in the cloud, and that's always good. Same thing with startup time. As we're seeing people run some kinds of workloads that are smaller things that need to just come up, do something, and then go away, you want to make sure that the overhead of startup time each time is not eating a lot of resources. Also work on predictability. I'm going to mention this a little bit later. We're going to talk about it some more. And finally, making sure that what you're running is actually something that where you can understand what's going on. So flight recorder, JFR, and mission control are two important parts of that. So at Java 1 last year, a few months ago, it was basically September, so just about the time that Java 9 came out, we announced a couple of pretty important things. One of those things was that we would start, Oracle would start, someone is getting a call here. Whose phone is this? You want your phone? Here you go. Ken is calling. I should have answered. That would have been fun. All right, so so we announced that Oracle is going to start producing OpenJDK builds. And in fact, that is something that we're doing. You can go and get Oracle built and tested OpenJDK builds. And those are always going to be at the latest Java level. We are also licensing those under an open source license. And that, of course, means that you can take them and use them according to that license for pretty much anything you want. There are, of course, obligations that the GPL imposes, so that's good to be aware of. We also took a set of features that we had that previously were commercial and closed source, and we've opened those up. So I'm going to talk in a moment about some of those. And then the final thing here is as I mentioned, OpenJDK is a large community, and it's a community of a bunch of companies, but also a lot of individuals who've gotten together in order to implement Java. Okay, so Java 9, the last version that came out, of course, brought us the Jigsaw module system. This is something that we've seen in the past 6 months, a lot of people playing with, experimenting with, trying it out, swapping war stories. One of our goals in this really was to make the transition fairly easy, so it was an important design criteria that it not be all or nothing, right? We didn't want you to have to go and go through an entire exercise of modularizing all of your code and having the whole industry have to do that in order for you to be able to start. And so a good deal of the work and why it took so long to deliver was making sure that it would be possible for you to start using it without modularizing, and then start to modularize pieces as you went along and allow the industry as a whole to do that without having some kind of big bang moment. And in fact, we used it as well to modularize the JDK itself. Okay, and this sounds obvious, maybe it sounds trivial, but in fact it was quite a large exercise. So we found that in fact it took us a couple of major releases to actually go through the JDK and find places where there were dependencies that we weren't even aware of and clean those up and basically get to the point where it could be modularized. Now, why is this important? Well, we talked about smaller footprint and higher density, right? We talked about security. Well, actually having a modularized JDK is important here. In fact, what you want to be able to do and what Java 9 lets you do with Jigsaw and with JLink is basically create a custom runtime that has all and only the pieces that your application needs, right? Now, why is that important? Well, of course, it becomes smaller. It also becomes more secure because if you don't need, say, the desktop module for graphical user interfaces, you don't have to bring that with you. You just need the pieces that are there. And so if there are vulnerabilities that crop up in those areas, you can rest assured that that code is not even there, so that is not a vulnerability that affects you. This, I think, is something that we're going to see becoming even more important as we're going forward. Okay, there are a few other features in 9. I'm not going to go through that, but of course, 9 was a big release. It had a lot in it. It took us multiple years to deliver. And so, in fact, there's a tremendous amount there. And by the way, I think I have to give a talk and talk about containers, right? So a lot of what is there and a lot of the things that we're working on going forward are actually thinking about things that can help Java play well in a containerized world, okay? And that's really because we're expecting to see some of these aspects, right? It basically becomes very, very important for Java to be able to understand what kind of environment it's running in, and for you to be able to tailor what you're doing into the kind of environment that, that containers afford you. And I think we're actually going to have a number of talks. I see somebody here today in an orange jacket who's going to talk. There are 2 guys in an orange jacket. Only one of them will be giving a talk on containers, I bet, though. Okay. So why does this help? Well, of course, you get all of the benefits of a managed language and runtime, right? But you also have a language which is hardware and operating system agnostic. In fact, you get the kind of safety and security that the JVM gives you, but with reliability, with compatibility, and a tremendous ecosystem available to you, so you don't have to write everything yourself. If you need something, there's a really good chance that there's a library or framework out there that provides it for you already. So this is something that we're committed to going forward. We see the great use that people are making of Java in big data and machine learning and that kind of super large heap environment. But we also see people using Java extensively for things like microservices and using things in containers. And so we're really focused on trying to understand the things that we can do in Java that help make that better as we go forward. Okay, so I mentioned earlier open sourcing commercial features. I'm going to mention a couple of those now. Mission control and flight recorder. So flight recorder is actually, this sounds like, well, I've seen 100 things out there that tell me what's going on and help me diagnose performance and threading issues and that kind of stuff in the JVM. The difference about this is the flight recorder actually uses the data that the JVM itself is generating in order to make decisions about when to optimize, what code paths are hot, when memory allocations are occurring, when a garbage collection is occurring. And so many of the other things you'll see out there are sort of an extra layer that's collecting more information, and that can be a huge source of overhead. And in fact, that overhead itself can actually change the behavior of the JVM, so that what you end up debugging is something completely different from what happens when that debugging information is not there. When you use flight recorder, you don't have to do that, right? It is using the information that's already collected by the VM. It's just surfacing it in a way that you can access with a tool like Mission Control, also being open sourced, which will allow you to really dive into depth and kind of understand what's going on. Class data sharing. This is basically something that allows you to take the code of your application and put it into a shareable library, right? A dynamic link library. And so what that allows you then to do is share the code not only of the JDK, but also of your application across multiple instances that are running in the same operating system or even across operating systems. So again, that helps a lot in startup time. It helps a lot in reducing overhead and footprint. And then usage tracker is something that we built and have used at Oracle, and now it's being open sourced, that allows you to keep track of how many VMs you're actually running and where they're running and what versions they're running and other stuff like that. Okay, so if any of you, I'm sure probably a lot of you just before coming into this said, gosh, I'd really like to download Java. And so you went to a site like the Oracle site and you said, I'm going to download it, and this is what you saw. Well, that's kind of exciting, but it feels a little old and stale to me. I mean, this is like 6 months old, right? That's no good. So I think we should do something about that. In fact, Alex, could you come up here? This is Alex Buckley, and I think I want you to help. Can you press that? Yeah.
Big green button.
Press the big green button. All right, and we had a long time figuring out, oh, now look at that. Somebody has pressed it again. That's no good, yeah. Somebody's trolling us. All right, Java 10. Thanks. Okay, well, there we go. So now what will the page look like?
Even more exciting.
Even more exciting, let's see. Oh, all right, Java 10. All right, this is not live, but it actually, it may be, as we speak, actually live. If somebody wants to check it, if it's not, don't say anything. All right. We'll put it this way. By the time we're eating lunch today, it will look like this. And in fact, even more exciting, I mean, this is all kind of commercial and stuff. Can we, shouldn't there be an open source version too? All right, there we go. This is the OpenJDK site and general availability of Java 10. All right.
March the 20th, 2014.
At what time?
10:20.
10:20. There
Precisely.
we go. All right, great. So, Alex, I think what would be kind of fun here is maybe we can talk a little bit about what's in 10. And I think the first thing to notice, now you remember that big long list of stuff that was in 9. The list that is in 10 is a little more svelte. It's kind of, yeah, it's, it's slimmer, but it's very good. And so why don't you tell us a little about what is there?
Am I, who can not hear me? Excellent, no one can not hear me, everyone can hear me. Good. So my name is Alex Buckley. I work in the Java language team, and my day job, so to speak, is to edit the Java language specification. So I wouldn't say heartbroken that people are not reading it. It gets quite a few references on, who is using Stack Overflow regularly? Yeah, that's a lot of hands.
Some people even had 2.
I'm always actually pleased to see that the really best answers on Stack Overflow are the ones that are quoting the Java language specification and linking directly to 8481 method overriding. So let me talk about the most fun and sort of developer-focused feature of Java 10. We often hear the criticism that Java is too verbose, has too much redundancy, and we can't change the Java language overnight, but if you've looked at Java 8, then you'll know that lambdas and streams were a pretty successful down payment on reducing that sort of debt of redundancy. And the main trick that lambdas have for avoiding redundancy is type inference. Now, Java is statically typed and always will be, but you can see that in short snippets like I'm passing to the filter and map methods, they're just as readable without explicit types in the declarations than if I had to say what the type of the block and the type of blue are. Now, of course, the types are still there, but the compiler infers them so that your IDEs can still work. Well, that was all pretty successful. So in 10, we're introducing the var keyword to bring type inference to local variables. This is the most frequently requested feature from developers coming to Java from other languages. Scala and C# and even C++ all have this feature. Now, Java is late to the party on purpose, because when you're adding features to the #1 programming language in the world, and you're adding those features for all time, the cost of a mistake is very high. So we think very carefully and cautiously before adding a feature, even as small as this, one keyword, to the Java language. What we've seen in developers coming from those other languages is that once you've used this feature, it's hard to live without. One more slide.
All right.
Now, some people will freak out at the loss of type information. Who is freaking out right now? There are hands. Not many hands. Thank you, but thank you for being honest, because, I mean, seriously, because Java is not just statically type, but it's always had, you know, types to the left and to the right and to the up and to the down. But if you think about it, what's important in short snippets of code like this? Is it the types of the local variables or their names? We would argue that it's really the names, because as you read the code, and bear in mind the Java principle that reading is more important than writing, as you read the code, you're looking for the names in the flow of the code. The types of the local variables are often just implementation details. If you choose reasonable names for your local variables, then often the code with var is more readable than the code with explicit types at the top, because there's none of the repetition between the type name and the variable name, and the brevity of var increases the prominence of the variable names. So this is in Java 10. It's in at least one noted IDE right now. I encourage you to try it out. And with that, I'll hand back to George.
Thank you, Alex. What Alex wasn't going to say is it also lines up really nicely. Okay, and for anyone who's curious, I mentioned the development being done in OpenJDK. That means you can actually go and read the JEP, that is the Jdk Enhancement Proposal, which talks in quite some detail about the design and design decisions made. And in fact, you can see that as well for some of the other features that are in 10. Okay. And the next thing that I wanted to mention, and I'm actually going to bring another colleague up on stage to talk a little bit about this. So we've done a bunch of work on garbage collection, and specifically the G1 garbage collector in 10. So I'd like to invite Charlie Hunt to come and talk about that. Chicago local, Charlie Hunt. All right.
Well, thanks, George. As I was walking up here, I kind of felt like Jim Valvano on his ESPY speech. But I don't think I'll have something as entertaining as Jim would have to say up here. So in JDK 10, we made some really nice improvements with G1. The one that's getting a lot of attention is we've multi-threaded the full GC. So if you're having to get to that situation where G1 has got to go into a full GC, it's now multi-threaded. There's some other things that we've done to reduce pause times, where we've refactored some code where we're in pauses in G1, which make those pauses faster. What you're going to see out of that is, because G1 is time-based, so you set a goal for a pause time. So you say, okay, so my pauses are going to get faster. Okay, but how does that work with a pause time goal? What's going to end up happening is you'll have less frequent GCs because you're able to do more work. In other words, you're going to collect more regions. If you remember, G1 is region-based. So you'll have less frequent GCs. Another exciting thing in the area of garbage collectors, as you'll see on the slide here, there's a project called ZGC. ZGC borrows from the name of the ZFS file system from Solaris. ZGC is a low latency garbage collector. So if you're in this realm of you're looking for lower latency than what you can achieve with G1, ZGC is worth taking a look at. Although it's a new project, you might think, well, there's a lot of work that goes on with collectors. There's a lot of evolution or maturity that has to go along with collectors. ZGC is very well along its way to being mature. I've been beating on this thing an awful lot over the last year, and I'm really impressed with it. It really is closing the gap in that need of low latency. I think with that, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thanks, Rob. Okay, and in addition, I should mention the code for ZGC is in OpenJDK, and in fact, there are also early access binaries that are available. So you can take that, you can download it and try it today, as well as binaries for some other projects. And in fact, with that, let's look a little bit into the future here. So Java 11, well, what do we know about Java 11? And we know one thing about it, it's coming in 6 months. Roughly 6 months from today, I think. And in fact, it doesn't have very much in it yet. And the reason I say yet is because the model that we have with these time-based releases is essentially that features are not added to a release until they're done. So basically, you can see that, in fact, 11 already has a few things that are past the gate, and over time, it will have some more things. It probably will be roughly the kind of size that 10 is, so it's not going to be like 9. And that's intentional. Again, we want to make sure that you're seeing rapid evolution and getting features into your hands quickly, but making sure that the features you are getting are well-tested, well-thought-out, well-designed, well-specified. And so, again, you won't see features coming into the 11 early access builds, which, by the way, are available on about a weekly basis, and until those features are really done and really solid. And those early access builds are provided so that you can test them early, so that you can try them out and understand how they're going to affect you or what possibilities they bring to you, and so that you can give us feedback. So even if you don't want to come to OpenJDK and start hacking on the JVM, a great thing that you can do to help yourself and to help folks in the community is testing and giving feedback of those early access builds. Okay, so out even past 11, what are some of the areas that we're looking at? I'm just going to mention a few things very quickly. One of the things that we think is a big challenge that we are tackling with, I think you called it, what was it, the Brian Getz down payment system? Basically doing small bits that we're biting off in each of these smaller releases as they come along, is actually working on object data layout. And what I mean by that is, let's see, if you were to look at the way that the Java runtime lays out memory and puts objects into memory, and then you were to look at what hardware designers think of in terms of how they think data should be processed and the kinds of optimizations they're putting in, these two things actually don't go that well together. Java essentially, from its very beginning, had as a philosophy that there were primitive types and there were object types. And you were kind of one or the other. Primitives gave you the possibility for great speed. They essentially were native types and handled that way by the runtime. Objects were not. Objects gave you a lot of flexibility, but sometimes could be a challenge for performance because the runtime had to make assumptions about them and what it could do with them. Things like garbage collection, right? So basically, what we're looking at doing is understanding that in the past 20 years, the world has changed. And the biggest change is that CPUs have gotten a lot faster, but memory access has not really. In fact, things have gotten very complicated in hardware design with all kinds of levels of caches that the hardware uses to be able to do things more quickly. So it really becomes a problem for a managed runtime of trying to make sure that the memory you want to do work on, say you have a large collection of objects, is all actually properly aligned and available to the CPU that's going to do an operation on this set of data, so that it can do it really, really quickly for you. As a Java programmer, you don't get to make those decisions of where things are and how they're actually represented. We want to make sure that Java is doing a great job of this for you, and make it so that you can just write natural, great Java code, and the runtime will do the magic to make the performance be excellent. So we think that part of the next step here is basically making it so that you can indicate certain kinds of data where you're prepared to give up a little bit of the flexibility that you get with objects in order to have better performance. And so what will happen eventually is some of these more complex data types than primitives you'll be able to indicate are something that the runtime can actually deal with in a way that allows it to make it very compact, that makes it possible to fit a lot of data into a cache line so that the hardware can process it really, really quickly when it's needed to. The main key here is basically giving up object identity in order to embrace immutability. And I think that this is something, if you're interested in this, look for talks on Project Valhalla. You can think of value types here. And you can actually go to OpenJDK and see the ongoing work on this, and in fact, even builds that have early prototypes of this today. Another area that we feel is important is native interop. So Ken mentioned earlier JNI, Java Native Interface. He said, try not to use it, it's really painful. I can actually tell you, because I was there at the time, that the Java Native Interface was not really designed to make it easy to call between Java and native languages. And in fact, it is possible to do much better, and we think now is the time to do so. So we have a project called Panama, which is working on doing exactly this. And you can kind of imagine the way this works is you sort of feed a particular tool a header file, a native header file, and it basically creates everything for you in order to make it so that you can call back and forth between native and Java and use data between native and Java, but in a way that is both more performant and also more secure than what JNI lets you do today. So that's Project Panama. You can check that out. A final project to mention here is Loom. And this is about bringing fibers to the JVM. So basically, it's about letting you do things with extremely lightweight threads, very, very lightweight to create, invoke, and switch between. And so that's something that we think will be sort of the next evolution of support for parallelism in Java. Okay. So finally, just to kind of bring it all together here, we see these trends in computing, and we are always looking at ways to try to make sure that Java is bringing you the possibility of taking advantage of those things, right? So we want to always make sure that as new things are coming down the pipe, whether it be new hardware or new programming models, that Java gives you support, but in a way that, as Alex said, is very thoughtful, and we're designing not just for the thing that's trendy this year, but for the programs that 20 years from now, one of you is going to be standing up on stage and showing a program that you wrote in 2018, and it's still going to be running on the latest version of Java. By that point, we'll probably, what will we be at? We'll be at like Java 400 or something. It's going to be awesome. Okay, so in any rate, thank you very much. Congratulations to everyone for getting to this point where we have Java 10. And I wanted to mention a few talks that are going on, so please check these out. And as I mentioned, there will be a Chicago Java user group session at the end of the day where you can come and enjoy some beverages and also ask us questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Gerald, and don't go because he has some important things to say, right? Thanks.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much, George. So of course that now means that my Java talk at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to update now to Java 10, right? Some more work for me. Before I let you go, just a few housekeeping slides. When you go out on the left-hand side from my direction, right-hand side from your direction, there is the Oracle Developers Launch, and one thing that we're running is the SIP labs. Those are compressed hands-on labs that take about half an hour for you to run through. They are in a competitive fashion, so you can go there, sign up, and then you run through some self-paced hands-on labs. Whoever is the quickest, though, to finish those labs can win this nice little drone there on the top right. So there's only one, so go over there. You can do as many labs as you like while you're there, and whoever is then, there's a leaderboard, you will see where you will be. Whoever ends up by the end of the day on top will get this nice drone. Also, as Ken already said before, we have a Women in Technology lunch going on today. This is for our appreciation of diversity and inclusion. Now, the Women in Technology Lunch is open for everybody. So whether you are a woman in technology, whether you would like to participate as a man, show your support, etc., please go and find that lunch and participate in those talks from the women we have there talking about their experience in IT. Big thanks to our sponsors that make Oracle Code happening. So Oracle Code is not only the Chicago event, we actually have 15 events worldwide, Chicago being the third one now. We just kicked off in the US, thanks to our sponsors that made this happen. Also, if you would like to do more training, learn at your own, self-paced at home, you can do so with Oracle University. We do have some educational material that you can just sign up, go there, education, oracle.com/code day, and then you can do many, many different courses, whether it's Java or not, on Oracle technology at home. And then, if you haven't seen yet, we do have a new developer portal, developer.oracle.com. This is a new portal for any developer using Oracle technology. It's basically a landing page that you can go to and find all the information. Again, whether it's Java or any other technologies that Oracle provides. The agenda, as said before, make sure that you download the Oracle Events app. If you don't have done already, look for Oracle Code Chicago, and then you actually do have the agenda at hand as well as the sessions. We now have, after this keynote, a short coffee break for about half an hour, and then we're gonna kick off at 11:15, I believe, with the sessions as well as hands-on labs as well. And then, as said before, we do have the Ask the Experts panel, so all our Java guys here in front, if you didn't get a chance yet to hammer them with your questions around Java, will still be there at 6 o'clock tonight, and you get a full hour to hammer them with questions. Also, I was told we do have the, and I think George mentioned that before, the Chicago Oracle user group here present as well today that have nice little laptop stickers. Alfredo is somewhere here, there he sits, the president for the Oracle user group Chicago. So if you aren't a member yet, come and find him. He will be around the whole day. Get your sticker and become a member of the user group. It's a free user group, as far as he told me, right? Yeah. Great. Last but not least, we do have a promotion going on today for Oracle Code participants. For all of you, we have $500 trial credits for the Oracle Cloud. You will see those flyers around, so you can just pick up one if you would like to try out Oracle Cloud. You can just enter the promo code there. It will take you to a page, you register, and you get $500 of free credit to try the Oracle Cloud. And with that, I would like to thank you very, very much for your attention, and I wish you a great Oracle Code Chicago. Thank you.